Okay, Mady Mantha, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Jason. I'm super excited.
Yeah, I'm super excited for you to come on. I'm appreciative to Rob May for and a little bit earlier guest. I say early guest as if like we've been around so long. This is like episode 4 or 5 or something. It's still
Yeah.
early, but yeah, he was nice enough to put us in touch. It seems like you've been steeped in startups and steeped in building with AI and building AI products for quite a while, and I'm really excited to learn more and to learn from you. So, thanks.
Yeah, same here. I'm excited.
For starters, maybe just give a bit of context on Happypillar, what it is, how it came to be.
Yeah, totally. So, my co founder and I started Happypillar about 3 years ago. We're using AI to make parenting easier. I know that parenting is already pretty easy endeavor. Exactly. Our platform specifically provides behavioral interventions for children dealing with anything from tantrums to issues following directions, issues with self-esteem to big changes in the house like maybe a new sibling and stuff like that. And it just helps kids form healthy attachment. And the delivery mechanism or the access to this kind of therapeutic intervention is the innovation. And we're able to do this at scale using AI. I'm not a parent, but my co-founder is, and we met when we were working at this other startup doing things in conversational AI, and this was during the pandemic, and things were definitely a little different then. Parenting was a little different as well. All of the things that I guess were things that you just did, like going to the park or going to a music class or going to a soccer game, all of a sudden became things that you couldn't immediately do. And so she was having a hard time with her kids, and she did this kind of therapy with a therapist, and it worked like magic. And she said, could we, it costs $200 a session, $1,000 a month. I can afford it, but I wonder if we can make it somewhat better, easier using natural language processing. And she was like, you work in NLP. Do you think you could do this? And I was like, yeah, I think we could figure something out. And 3 years later, we built Happypillar, and we have thousands of parents using it, sending us emails like, wow, this helps my kids. Thanks for building this. And that makes our everyday feel really good.
Nice. And I forgot, usually I start out these discussions, especially since we only had a quick chat before, but we don't know each other super well. But the journey that I'm on is to understand how to build different in a way that I can be far more present at home without compromising ambition, and also how these emerging tools like AI can help facilitate that. So how AI is changing how startups get built and funded, and how someone like me might be able to leverage it to build different. So with that in mind, I'm just curious, how did you first come to be working in AI in the first place? Where did that come from? How long has it been? And maybe talk a bit about just like how the landscape's been evolving since when you started to now.
Yeah, that's such a great question. I was in AI right when it wasn't really called AI. It was more probabilistic statistical modeling because that's all what machine learning is, just probabilities. And my background isn't really in the theoretical aspects of machine learning either. I studied math and computer science in college. And then I worked on the Tappy oil pipeline at Brookings, working just on statistical modeling. And then I've worked on building AI solutions that kind of have real world utility. And I did this at scale at places like Walmart, Home Depot, Target. And then in the open source conversational AI space at Rasa, I worked on intelligent search and search ranking, all kinds of things like that. And I guess what I learned is that while foundational models are pretty great, like GPT and O1 and Llama 2 and Gemini, they're incredibly powerful, but the raw power isn't quite enough. And the exciting shift that we see today, where the real opportunity lies, is moving from this kind of training phase, which, yeah, requires massive compute, to the application phase. And that's what you've been talking about a little bit in your newsletter as well, is how do we take these general purpose models and make them useful, and how do we build them differently for specific tasks, like how do we use clever fine tuning? How do we use prompt engineering? But especially, how do we use like some of these specialized techniques to build something that has value and utility? So we're not only talking about AI in the theoretical sense. So yeah, I've been doing this for over 10 years. And there's a running joke right now that every company is just a chat GPT wrapper, right? And there's some truth to it, but I'd argue that in some cases, like a well-designed, specialized solution that's tailored to a very specific domain It could be climate science, it could be climate tech, it could be like behavioral change and parenting, but tied to a specific domain with carefully curated data and expert knowledge baked in. Even though it's a wrapper, that can actually be more valuable than the underlying foundational model itself.
The Happypillar story, but if you just look for a minute at the landscape, what do you see? Is it overhyped? Is it saturated? Is it a bubble? Are there areas that are overhyped and areas where the change will be profound? I'm
Yeah.
asking all kinds of leading questions, which I should never do as a host, but I wish I had just hit period or question mark after I said, "What do you see?" and then stopped. So pretend I did that.
Yeah. Okay. So pretend I'm an LLM and you gave me a question and I'm just like generating data.
I know
Easy.
clearly a terrible prompt engineer.
No, that's exactly how you need to do prompting. That's cool because I think that we're seeing, first of all, I think we're just scratching the surface of what AI has to offer and all of the possibilities. And I think right now it's super exciting because we're seeing a surge in AI native startups, companies that are like building their entire product around AI from the ground up, not just bolting it on as an afterthought. And all of these startups, if you've seen, they have small, agile teams, super rapid iteration cycles, and a very deep understanding of the probabilistic nature of machine learning. I don't want to say things like, oh, yeah, it's just a team of two cracked engineers doing this, because everyone on Twitter is like saying that. But think of a startup, not just Happypillar, but think of a startup that's using AI to optimize crop yields in vertical farms. They're not just using AI to monitor temperature, which you may have seen 5 years ago or even 10 years ago, which was groundbreaking then, but they're using it to predict plant growth, to adjust nutrient delivery, and even optimize the lighting spectrum based on real time feedback and these specialized custom models that they have. And that's a fundamentally different approach than traditional agriculture. And that I think mirrors the shift that we're seeing in behavioral health, cardiovascular health, people using AI not just to predict the propensity of heart attacks, but using it to dynamically alter and pivot someone's treatment plan. And you might be seeing this a lot in climate tech too, just using first principles thinking to build AI native startups. So I think that's a really cool change that we're seeing, is not just how do I inject AI into this process, but how do I like really transform this using all the things that AI offers today.
And for someone like me stepping in from the outside with beginner mind, it's confusing because you've got all these LLMs that are raising money at fancy prices, and then you've got all these upstarts, and everyone says they're doing something in AI, and there's all these tools, and a lot of the tools have overlap and are saying the same things, like we enable building agents, and there's open source ways and closed source ways, and like, how does one make sense of the landscape? And from your standpoint, where you're actually building on top of the underlying models, like, how do you get confidence and conviction that you're not building on top of quicksand, given how quickly the landscape is evolving and how much uncertainty there is?
Yeah, that's interesting. I guess I would always go back to thinking, am I answering my customer's problem? Like, am I addressing their problem? Am I building something that they want to come back and use? Am I building something that, if I worked in clinical trials, am I building something that these companies are able to use and help them inform better outcomes? So I guess I would always go back to asking the question of, is this useful to the people that I'm building it for? Is this responsive to my community? And sure, you can make use of all of these new tools, if you will. You could start using O1, and then DeepSeek comes out that uses pure reinforcement learning, and it doesn't use supervised learning anymore, which is something that we've all used building things over the past 2-3 years. Or you could say, we could use newer techniques like low rank adoption, which is really powerful for fine tuning. And you're right, all of these things are happening at an increasingly faster pace, things coming out every other day, every week. But software has always been like, people still use Java to build these big systems, highly performant systems. People still need rules to make things work. And AI is still just based on probabilistic models, which means that it doesn't have definitive answers. And you have to deal with a lot of uncertainty anyway. That's just the nature of working in AI. So I guess going back to using a combination of rules and building in expert knowledge and answering your customers' problems is always a winning equation.
Great. And so it sounds like in the Happypillar case, so your co-founder was actually a customer of this type of therapy for her family and uncovered that it was really valuable and thought that maybe using AI, it could be delivered in a way that could be broader and more accessible at a lower price point without compromising quality. I'll go on with the question, but am I right so far?
You said it so great.
Okay. So then you came in as the person that's been steeped in AI. Where did you go from there? How much of it was driven by where the tools are and what's possible versus the customer? And how did they meet in the middle? What did that process look like? And how is that the same or different from companies that you've built in the past?
When we first started this, we were still working our other jobs. So we worked evenings and weekends. And I think not having, 60 or 70 hours a week to focus on just this, at least in the beginning, helped us come to this or follow this process, which is we wanted to replicate the mechanisms of this kind of behavioral intervention and then just deliver it at scale. So instead of a therapist helping one family, this was AI helping many families, like a one-to-many situation. And in the beginning, we didn't even use AI. We asked our parents, we posted in, I think, a Facebook mom group saying, hey, this helped me with my kids' tantrums. Is anyone else's kids having tantrums? And you can imagine everyone said yes. We were like, hey, would you be willing to try something like this? And within, I think, 2 hours, we had a 60 parent wait list. So we asked them to have these 5-minute conversations with their kids, send us the recordings, because that's what this therapy is talking to your kid. And we just got those recordings and we got a therapist and then started working on our AI model then to analyze it and to provide feedback. So we didn't have a fancy app. We didn't have a whole lot of like custom AI models or specialized techniques to work on them. We just had recordings that we made sense of. And then we slowly built on top of it tools and features that made real sense and that people and parents really needed access to. And so we built this entire kind of AI pipeline iteratively. And we didn't have any of that in the beginning. We just had me and Sam listening to recordings, sending it off to a therapist, and giving the parents feedback on it.
Uh-huh. And so maybe talk a bit about how it evolved from getting the recordings and having 100% human delivering the feedback to starting to pick off pieces of that and finding aspects to automate. Yeah, so it'd be helpful to understand that process, that evolution, where you are today, the barriers, what's possible, what's becoming possible, and where you see it going. And gosh, I can't believe I'm trying to fit all that into one question. I'm sorry.
Okay, so we had recordings. And then we built like an app where you could we had this button that said record. You could hit that button. You could record a conversation with your kid. And then we built in a diarization mechanism, which is just identifying who the parent is and who the child is. Because really, at the bedrock of this is we want to analyze what the adult is saying and not really care about what the child is saying because we want to provide feedback on the adult. And then we built a classification model that was trained on these kind of parent-child interaction therapy principles. So we could categorize the adult speech into these 5 to 8 categories, things like praise and behavioral descriptions and criticism, all kinds of things. And we were like, okay, this can't just be keyword spotting. We can't just find a keyword for praise and, okay, you have a praise. It's really about understanding the intent and context of the speech. So we used supervised learning because we thought that if we have access to a lot of label data, which we started collecting, a ton of conversation data, we thought, okay, we could understand the entire intent and the context of the speech and classify it exactly like therapists would classify it. And our data annotation techniques were unique because it wasn't just me or another data engineer annotating the data. It was our therapist looking at this data, annotating it, and telling us that, okay, yeah, based on the context of the speech, this is a praise, or this is a description, this is whatever the classification was. And once we had a performant classification model, we also used other AI techniques called semantic textual similarity that helped us look at how close the parent was adhering to the therapy's principles. And then as we had a rudimentary model, we started collecting more and more data, and our data flywheel was great. Parents found this useful. They were using it more. And as they used it more, we had more data to feed back into our models and to make it even better. And then we thought, okay, this is cool. But parents often talk to a therapist at the end of each week or at the end of each session, and they look at all of this data, and the therapist tells them, hey, you did great here. You could have done better here. They don't have that kind of thing within the app. So then we incorporated a weekly survey where we aggregated their interaction scores, the survey responses, and then we gave them access to historical trends. Parents could look at personalized insights, they could track their progress over time, and that's how you analyze customer data at Walmart or Target, and you help identify patterns and make personalized recommendations. And then we thought, okay, I think if they had content within the app, that would be really meaningful. A therapist telling them about how to deal with a particularly difficult week, or a therapist telling them about anxiety with 3-year-olds and what you could do. And so we started incorporating content in the app and then giving personalized recommendations to parents that were having issues with anxiety or bedtime problems and stuff like that. So yeah, we kept adding tailored content within the app. And then at the end of 6 months, we had this entire pipeline that had multiple AI models working together, going far beyond just like a chatbot answering questions. And then we had multiple specialized techniques, from reinforcement learning to supervised learning to then providing personalized recommendations. And it's just a work that evolved over time, but we didn't set about, day one saying, oh, we need to do all these cool things with AI and include them within the app. It was more so an evolution of, okay, I think parents could find some kind of recommendations useful, or I think it could help them if they looked at their progress week over week. That would help them want to stick with the program, and kind of just infused AI in that way.
Are there services that existed before Happypillar that deliver this type of therapy either through telehealth, one to one, or some other means of virtual delivery?
Yeah, totally. And the landscape today is pretty mature, but the way we saw it and the way that it exists today even is that on the one end of the spectrum, it's exactly like you said. You have one-to-one therapy. You also have telehealth, which is also one-to-one, where services connect you with a therapist online and you can talk to them, and that's absolutely needed. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you have solutions that are like psychoeducation. And I'm sure we all read this, not just books and blogs, but services that tell you, hey, if your 4-year-old doesn't want to leave the park, here are things that you could try with them next time you go to the park to get them to leave faster. And those are great, but it's parents are so busy and they have so many things that they have to learn and read and think about, that there wasn't anything to fill this huge missing middle of, is there a program or is there a service that's actionable, that's like low lift, that only takes 5 minutes a day, and that doesn't require you to read a bunch of stuff and then remember it when the thing is happening to you, but you just have to spend 5 minutes a day interacting with your kid, talking to them. And in doing so, you give them 5 minutes of full attention, and you practice all these techniques, which you don't have to think about, like having a personal trainer. You don't have to count your reps when you're working out. And then they do everything for you and you get feedback.
So is the one-to-one session not a part of this process? The Happypillar process?
You have a one-to-one session with your kid. You have a conversation with your kid that gets recorded, and then our AI listens to it and gives therapist vetted feedback after.
And I've been hearing this term AI native, and I think you might have used it earlier in this discussion, just in talking about how startups are starting that are, fully embracing these tools from the outset versus bolting them on later. When I hear you describe how Happypillar has formed and you've been iterating on it, to me, it sounds like just a sound kind of company or product formation and development process, but it doesn't sound fundamentally different than how startups were built before. How do you think about this term AI native, and what's different about AI native startups versus just regular, well-run startups?
Yeah. Wow. And I think depending on who you ask, they might say I think maybe they're the same.
I'm asking you.
Yeah. And I would say I think that you can't divorce or ignore a lot of really good how to build product the right way or how to build a company the right way. How do you employ all of these? How do you collect feedback? How do you interview the right kind of domain experts before you're starting a company to learn as much as you can from them so you can build things the right way? I don't think all of that is very different from really just building something that's AI native. The difference I think lies in like the example that you and I were discussing about the crop yields and farms is thinking about how maybe machine learning and data and I don't know, vector databases can help you reimagine the way traditional agriculture works, or how can you reimagine the way that traditional therapy works with instead of you going meeting your therapist on Zoom or going to your therapist's office and talking to them one on one, how can we replicate some of those things using machine learning models and data and technology? And I guess like how did people think about building websites when web 1.0 came about? Okay, you have a brick and mortar store, you go in, and I guess on one side you have shirts, and on the other side you have socks. And how do we like reimagine a website that has a catalog and a search index? And how do we make all of that possible? And I think AI is similar. It's like you have a website or you have databases and you have enterprise software that works in this way. How could we improve upon it using vector databases to store embeddings for our, I don't know, educational content? Because vector databases with their embeddings can allow us to quickly resurface the most relevant articles. And AI reads vector bases and high dimensional embeddings. That's just how they understand data. So maybe we use that. And yeah, how do we use all of this data to teach our models better? I think it's just like figuring out those aspects, but I think everything else remains the same. And even when we use AI models, because of the high degree of uncertainty that they have, we still use traditional software rules, if then statements, if else statements, because those work.
Heard about how the human therapist is involved in training the model in the formation of Happypillar's service. What is the human therapist's involvement ongoing, if any? And I'll ask that both in terms of holistically at all in the infrastructure of Happypillar, but also on a per client or per family basis.
Yeah, that's, I think, an important topic. And we often talk to parents about that. Starting with the data annotation, when we have access to all of these parent child recordings, the way we annotate data is unique. A therapist looks at our data and annotates it, labels it so that our classification models can read it and continue to learn on top of that. Engineers don't annotate our data. We just don't really have this deep subject matter expertise that therapists do. All of the content that you see within the app in Happypillar is also therapist created. It's not just something that AI generates. And the way that our models classify data is also based entirely on therapy, parent-child interaction therapy principles. So I would say that at every given point within Happypillar, we have either a pre-vetting by a therapist or a post-vetting by a therapist, and human checkpoints at every given point within our AI pipeline. That to us was very important because we didn't want to just build like an AI wrapper for therapy. We wanted to make parent-child interaction therapy accessible because it simply works and parents find a lot of value in it. So how do we charge parents $12 a month as opposed to $1,000 a month? How do they still do this within 5 minutes? And if you're going to a therapist office, they had to figure out scheduling. They had to spend an hour or hour and a half within their day to fit this in. But with Happypillar, you could do this at any time from anywhere, and it takes 5 minutes a day. So we wanted to solve challenges around scheduling, around cost, around accessibility. And AI was just like a medium that helped us do that.
So as you serve more customers, will you also need more therapists or at least therapist time?
Yeah, I would imagine so. Right now, we're able to service about 3 to 500,000 patients or parents without additional therapists with our small clinical team. So I imagine that we can scale up to 1 million parents with the same clinical team that we have right now, as we're able to automate parts of the annotation mechanism or parts of the AI pipeline mechanisms without sacrificing quality or without sacrificing human checkpoints. We're able to scale indefinitely.
And I know if you look at personal training, for example, on the fitness side, sometimes these apps will ask you, do you want someone who's a drill sergeant, or do you want someone who's encouraging, or do you want someone who is data driven, or does it work similarly in therapy? Are there different therapy personality types? And I know for an MVP, it makes sense to start with kind of one offering. Do you see expanding into choices over time, or do you think it's important to have one consistent Happypillar delivery style?
I did not think of that. I think that's such a cool idea. As you were saying that, it reminds me of Tars from Interstellar, where you could tweak his like humor level and sarcasm and all kinds of things. I imagine you would want to have more therapists, because I think we all choose our therapist based on how good of a fit it is personality wise. Right now, it's really just centered around the parent and the child interacting and building their relationship. And the therapist only comes in when it's time to give feedback on how they did and how to get them to improve and how to get them to stick with the program. So because they're not really talking to therapists, it's something that we probably don't have to think about in the short term. But I imagine as we're expanding into other modalities where you do have to interact with a therapist more and more, it would totally serve us if we thought of like different personality types and different, I don't want to say flavors because that doesn't sound good to attach to a person, but like a different flavor.
And gosh, there's two different ways I want to go with this, but I'll pick the first way and come back to the second. But the first way is we've talked about how AI is enabling the customer focused offering. How is it changing how you're building Happypillar, if at all? So more internally focused.
Oh, yeah, that is so. I probably think that all of the different advances in AI, all of the things that we see just every 6 months, there seems to be, I know there's stuff every week, but I would say that every 6 months there seems to be something meaningful that we can act upon and look into and learn. I think that it informs the way that we build internally, probably way more than just our external how parents interact with AI, which isn't all that different to them. They're just still talking to their kids and they receive some feedback and they look at that and they have access to all this content. But with the way that we build, I would say we started with using vector databases, which I know have been around for a while. They're pretty cool. They're groundbreaking or anything like that, but they're optimized for storing and searching high dimensional embeddings. And those embeddings are representations that AI models use to understand data. And so we use those kinds of databases like Pinecone or Quadrant or whatever, because they're incredibly fast and they're efficient for the kind of semantic search that we offer within Happypillar. We use reinforcement learning with some parts of our AI pipelines, with just like what DeepSeek does, which uses pure reinforcement learning with an interesting spin on the reward function. And that's been shown to significantly improve reasoning without a whole lot of labeled data. For certain aspects that don't require a ton of labeled data, we feel more confident using reinforcement learning. And then we used, specialized techniques like semantic textual similarity to calculate the mathematical distances for certain points. I would say that as we experiment within different parts of our AI pipeline, we want to look at the new things that come out to see if it makes sense for us to use, to see how useful it might be. Is it going to make our model more accurate? Is it going to make it more performant? Is it going to make our compute significantly less if we use something like low rank mechanisms so that you don't have to retrain your entire model? You can just retrain specific parts of it. So yeah, we look at it from like a utility base. Is it going to help A, B, and C? And if it does, we do it.
And what about when it comes to coding? How do you think about it as it relates to either profiles of roles in terms of engineers or designers or product managers or others that you might need, but also the profile of roles, the quantity of roles, and then the maybe some of the skills or soft skills that might be required to be successful in those roles within Happypillar. Is it changing any of that at all? Do you see that happening directionally, or is it more just building strong technical teams was as building strong technical teams will be?
No, I think it's totally changing. Even today, I'll say that I probably use Claude and Gemini and obviously GitHub Copilot to help make me code faster and better. There are things that certain methods or classes or functions that I don't want to necessarily write, or I can, but then the autocomplete feature or just me chatting and brainstorming with Claude and getting those like pieces that I don't want to necessarily write, I'll do that. I'll prompt it and I'll get that. So it helps me code faster. We probably, I'm trying to figure out how to say this kind of like just respectfully and gently too. We probably don't need like large teams of junior engineers or as many. We still need engineers. We still need a strong technical team, but we probably don't need as many because people can work faster. We still need strong teams because my friends and I always talk about this, which is a 10x engineer using AI is so powerful because AI still does probabilities and it does inferential thinking, it does prediction, it doesn't do anything deterministic. So you could ask it a question and it gives you an answer. It's not opinion based in any way. It could output a bit of Java for you or a bit of Python for you, but maybe you need to be using Java when you're building enterprise grade search. Maybe you need to be using Python when you want to customize your AI models. It doesn't have that kind of opinionated framework or a deterministic output, and that's where humans come in. You need humans to say, here are my preferences, this is my opinion. I think A is stronger than B when it comes to this particular thing we're talking about. So for that, you do need 10x engineers. But a 10x engineer with AI can do a lot more than a team of 5 engineers, I would say. So it helps inform the way that we build teams in that way, which is great because the market's not that great for raising money right now. So we've been able to do so much with so little over the past 3 years.
It used to be that the best way to become senior was to be junior.
Yeah.
How do you think AI will impact that path, and what will be the best way to make sure that we don't essentially run out of seniors without a farm system to train juniors?
Yeah. I'm curious for how you think we could do this too, but people don't. It used to be that like you needed to know a whole lot or memorize lots of things and know how to write a bibliography. Like when I was in college, be like, oh, are we using the AMA format to do this? And now you can just ask ChatGPT to do it. I would say like knowing certain, like you could do a lot more with how to use this knowledge than you could with just like knowing it. So I would say that with junior engineers, to look at this as an opportunity, you have access to so much more information. You have access to all these tools that could do so much for you. So can you build something meaningful? Can you start creating start by having your own portfolio, code as much as you can because coding will not take as long as it used to. So can you build up your portfolio? Can you build some interesting and meaningful things using these tools? Can you have AI will never have opinions, or even if it does, it's just like probability anyway. It's inferential thinking, it's not decisional thinking. So can you use as a human your decisional mindset to create something meaningful or beautiful? We want to be able to automate these things so you could focus on, I don't know, things like beauty. What's that thing that people used to say? Like, I do engineering so my kids can do poetry and philosophy or something like
Oh,
that.
I haven't heard that.
So, like, how could you use AI to do like mundane, boring, repetitive things and really have an opinion? Maybe build something really cool with AI, build up your portfolio. Um, Take the initiative to reach out to senior engineers or people at companies and try to maybe get into a mentorship or something like that. I think that the opportunity is huge. Junior engineering jobs aren't going anywhere, but maybe you just need to like go about it differently.
And I want to poke on something you said before. You talked about how the fundraising climate is
Yeah.
difficult, which has been so it's been good that AI has enabled you to do so much more with so much less. So that talks about in a world where there's not access to capital, what to do in the meantime. But if AI continues to enable us to do so much more with so much less, why even want the capital in the first place?
I know friends that have started companies. I mean, we started in 2022 when it was starting to get bad, but maybe not quite as worse as maybe 2023 was. And I have friends that started companies that essentially had to bootstrap. If you need to pay yourself, if you need healthcare, stuff like that, you could. I know friends that have done services contracts to raise a little bit of money to bootstrap their company that way, and more about bootstrapping than I do. I haven't really had to bootstrap as much, but we did crowdfunding. We have a lot of parent and therapist investors that we talk to that were like, "Wow, I wish I could invest in this, but like not a whole lot." So we had a crowdfunding platform where we raised checks as small as $1,000 from thousands of people. So we raised in like these mini tranches to 200K at a time over the course of the past 3 years. But yeah, you could bootstrap. You could build an MVP. It used to be that you could raise on an idea. Now you don't need to. You could build an MVP within a week or 2 weeks, depending on how focused you are, as in like how focused your vision is.
And the same question I asked you about coding and product management and design, I want to ask you about more go to market, whether it's marketing or partnerships or that more commercial side of the business. How much are you leveraging these tools over there, and how much opportunity do you think there is to do? And what are the tactics that you're implementing in terms of how to get more customers, how to drive more revenue, et cetera?
Yeah. I'm not a huge fan of using AI to generate like LinkedIn posts or just marketing content, ads, stuff like that. Cause I think there's still, you could definitely, you no longer have a blank page problem. You could generate stuff so you don't have to stare at a blank page when you're coming up with things to, how to write about your product, how to position it, to socialize it better. But there definitely needs to be a human element with that. But a lot of marketing ops we're able to automate using AI. There's lots of tools that can help you schedule things. There are tools that can help you make your ads even better, more performant. You could do something as low lift as even just brainstorming with your AI agent to figure out if your ads are good before you go live or before you reach out to an expert to do AdWords tagging, stuff like that. So I think a lot of the ops work that we do, we automate to a degree. We use tools and we just use generative AI as well so that we can spend more time thinking of, I don't know, a humorous way to talk about sleep issues or anxiety. Spend more time on things like that.
Uh-huh. And this is less of a Happypillar specific question, but when you think about categories that might be ripe to deliver, whether it's personal training or therapy or legal advice or accounting or whatever, there's a spectrum. There's some that could maybe be fully automated. There's some that need to stay fully human, and then there's some that can be hybrid. But then within the hybrid, I would imagine that it looks different in terms of which things are okay to be human and or which things are okay to be machine and which things need to be human. It probably depends case by case, depending on what type of thing it is. Have you thought much about this? Are there guidelines? Is there a chart? Is it like how would one go about determining how in the loop a human might be from case to case, and which areas might be more ripe to leverage these tools to try to automate?
Yeah, that's, I think, so important now because you have companies like Carvey, which is your legal AI assistant. How much of that is AI and how much of that is actual lawyers doing something? And you have people used to say, don't go on WebMD because it'll tell you like you're about to die when you have a headache and you're like, oh, I have a headache. What do I do? So I would say that in cases where I don't know, you're dealing with a uniquely human problem, whether it's like humans needing legal advice or medical advice or even behavioral challenge. And I think that's why with Happypillar, we make sure there's a human in the loop in kind of every checkpoint. It's important to have some kind of human intervention. You maybe shouldn't have generative AI go unchecked, but you need human guardrails and checkpoints to pre-vet and post-vet information that's going out to humans, especially if it's information that humans can base their decisions on, and especially if those decisions relate to anything legal or medical. I
Hmm.
think that is a sensitive area that you probably want to rethink, especially because there's so much uncertainty with AI. It's not an exact definitive answer. Even when you give it math problems, it could come back with, no, I think 2 + 2 is 5, and here's why. So you should always double check that. And I do that even when I'm prompting it. I say something which a lot of people tell you to do, which is just ask if it's sure. Say, are you sure again? And then it will like rethink and re-reason. So I think identifying certain areas like medicine, health, law could be a good way to go about it. If it's automating like database batch jobs, things like that, I think it's like safe to automate those things. But again, if you're like automating batch jobs in highly sensitive areas, you probably need to recheck that with a human systems admin or something like that.
Uh, Given that we've been talking about how these tools enable you to stand up new products and make progress faster, I would imagine that also applies to your competitors, either ones that exist today or future competitors. Do you think that the life cycle of companies is compressing? How do you think about moats and defensibility, and what will be the implications of AI on these things?
I used to think that, or I think, yeah, I used to think that once you have a foundational model, if this one foundational model outperforms everyone else, like that's their moat, they're so powerful. And now everyone is coming with their own foundational model. You have obviously the big players, you have Fang, you have DeepSeek, you have OpenAI. Everyone has a model. And does it matter for your specific use case if one is outperforming the other by 2 or 3%? Like, is your output, if you build a wrapper on it, going to be all that much more different? Probably not. So there is no moat with intelligence anymore, or is there? That's a little confusing. That I just need to think a little bit about that. If intelligence is free and if everyone's able to, by everyone, the big players are able to afford compute, then that no longer, intelligence no longer is a moat, then is data your moat. And I think that, sure, you could have labeled data, and the more data you have, the better your models are. But then, we're seeing DeepSeek with pure reinforcement learning and no label data outperform everyone else. Then have your own data moat. And I think if you look at data as having intrinsic value, data itself as a commodity, in addition to just creating data flywheels that can make your models more performant, that could be meaningful, right? If you, for Happypillar, we have all this data that can maybe inform better care approaches in pediatric health, that can maybe help us build diagnostic tools. So data is a commodity that could be useful. I think that your distribution will always be your superpower and your moat,
Mm-hmm.
specific expert knowledge and specific domain expertise. I would say a team of really amazing lawyers building something like a legal AI assistant and having their own distribution network. I think they probably need to worry less about their competitors that might not have access to highly specialized domain expertise. Yeah, I think it might come down to expert knowledge and distribution if compute and data don't really matter as much as they used to.
And where does what's happening in open source fit into all of this, if at all?
I love Llama. I love that they open sourced a lot of stuff. I think open source really is huge in terms of driving innovation
Mm-hmm.
because once more and more people have access to it, and you have people from diverse backgrounds, like different industries, different levels of expertise as engineers, as builders, as product managers. You have all those people taking open source and building something meaningful or building something on top of it, helping create custom specialized models is really great. If you look at Hugging Face, which takes a lot of open source models and they have engineers building really cool things on top of it, the community contributing to it, I think that is a huge driver for innovation for sure. I also just love open source. So
And back to Happy Pillar. I know I'm bouncing around a bit, but who is Happy Pillar for today from a customer profile, and who do you imagine it will be for in 2, 3, 5 years, if
yeah,
if different?
Happypillar today is for parents and caregivers with kids aged 2 to 7. We have a lot of customers who are also grandparents or just caregivers. Like I do Happypillar sometimes with my nephew. It's for caregivers with kids age 2 to 7. We definitely want to expand into support for older kids, preteens and teens. There's a huge need for that right now. And we also want to expand into couples and young adults because this kind of therapy delivery mechanism using AI lends itself really well to a 5 minutes couples version of this kind of therapy or a 5 minute session with just yourself as a young adult when you have lots of challenges that you're facing. So in 2 to 3 years, older kids. In 5 years, we're thinking couples. Really, I think the future of Happypillar, the way we see it, or Healthy Pillar, we also have that domain, is the premier mental health resource for kids and people of all ages.
Great. And in terms of a call to action for anyone listening that's inspired by your work, is there anything they can do to be helpful to you? Are there people you want to hear from? Are there things you want to impart in listeners to think about leaving this discussion?
Yeah, I would love for people to check us out at happypillar.com. Our app is free to use. It's available in both Google and the app stores. And if you're also passionate about wanting to revolutionize early childhood behavior, check us out at happypillar.com. We're always looking for passionate people to join our mission and our cause.
Great. Thanks, Mady. And anything I didn't ask that I should have, or any parting words for listeners?
I think you're just great to talk to. We've talked about a whole lot of stuff. I think you've covered it all.
Great. Well, thanks so much for coming on. It's a fascinating story. I can't wait to track your progress. My kids are a little old for the Happy Pillar of today, but as you expand into older kids, I agree with you. That is a necessary area. So keep me in mind for that as well. And best of luck.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Can't wait for you to be ground zero and get your thoughts on that.
Thanks, Mady.
All right. Thanks, Jason.